Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Visualize Better, Transform Your Interior Designs with 3D Visualizations, where we'll be focused on Enscape and SketchUp. My name is Gemma De Silva, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. So before we jump in, I just wanted to mention that we're actually live, which means you have the opportunity to ask the presenters any questions that you may have, and we'll get through as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. But first up, we'll have a bit of a presentation, and we'll also be diving into both Enscape and SketchUp for some live examples and tips. And speaking of presenters, with us today is Joseph Kim, who is a project manager at MGM Architects. And we also have Aaron Dietzen, who is a product content manager for SketchUp. And both Joseph and Aaron, they actually joined us for a webinar about a year ago now. So really pleased that we could get them back for another one. So thank you both for joining us, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. So first up is Joseph, who I am going to make presenter now. So Joseph, let me just do that. And then you can get ready to share your screen.
Sure.
And as you're just getting ready there, I just thought I'd tell the audience that yesterday I learned that you're in Nashville, Tennessee, which I have to admit I did have to Google where that was, but loving the fact that you're in America, I'm in Brazil, so that's all quite cool. But it sounds like your audio is working there. I can see your screen great, so
awesome.
I think you're ready to go.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and disable my webcam just so that we can save some bandwidth. So you'll see my screen only.
Fantastic. Looks great.
All right. Well, thank you, Gemma, for handing this over to me. And I thank Enscape for this wonderful opportunity to share the interior design and what we can do with Enscape once again. And I'm quite excited to share. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide. Here's my face if you've missed seeing on a webcam. But as Gemma said, I am a project manager at MGM Architects, and I currently am doing a lot of retail designs and also interior design, and been a huge part of my professional experience has been the interior design and retail design. So I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of insights based on my experience on this webinar. And as a side, I also run a YouTube channel. So I have a link here. If you would check that out, I have a lot of software tutorials and some hardware showcase. So it would be nice if you would check it out and subscribe if you would. So on this webinar, we're going to look at what is real-time rendering, as well as how Enscape works for the interior design. And along the way, I'll be showing some extra tips. So let's ask this question of what is real-time rendering? And rendering is, I have put emphasis on the rendering. So rendering is often referred as visualization or CGI. On a short Googling, it actually showed that rendering is the process of an outline image using color and shading to make it appear solid and three-dimensional. And hopefully on this one, we'll be doing a bit more than that. So you can see how the image here could be rendered as this sort of scene, so it looks a lot better. And since you all signed up for this webinar, I assume people are making 3D models like this one in SketchUp. I guess Aaron kind of goes over all of this on his streams and his tutorials as well. You can easily model this kind of model thanks to SketchUp and the 3D warehouse they have created. And you can also save your scenes and test out some of the composition and the 3D models that you find online, and then compose this sort of scene. And as you can see, we don't really have a material assigned yet, but you can test out the materials as well. You can see the wood screening on the one side, the floor, the stone, and the fabric on the upholsteries. And let's take a quick glance at the exterior. Same applies to the exterior, so you can apply some materials as well as just kind of seeing an aerial image. And sometimes seeing a little bit of context is quite helpful. And sometimes I also turn on the profile edges on the geometry so that things are a bit better outlined. And you can also turn on the shadow to do a bit of shadow and light study. And it makes the scene somewhat dynamic and look more pleasing for exterior scenes. But when we go to the interior, believe it or not, the shadow is turned on, but you can kind of see it, I guess, on the floor. But things start to kind of fall apart, if I may. So this is where we want to really touch bases with Enscape and utilize its sort of rendering capabilities. And especially if you have developed some complex scene, casting a shadow could be quite, I guess, resource heavy. So your computer could come to a halt, and turning on shadow and off could take a long time, or downright, I have experienced some crashes before. So the top tip here is to turn off shadow for your scenes. And actually, when you're saving the scene, make sure it is turned off so that your scene remembers the positioning of the time and the date, but it doesn't have it turned on. And I do want to mention a few more extra tips here. Let me just go to SketchUp side. I wanted to make sure you guys are seeing my screen here. Can you?
Yeah, looks great, Joseph.
Awesome. All right, so let me just look at the aerial view of this specific model that I was talking about. So as I'm showing here, if you have the styles, if you go to the edit tab here, once you have turned on the profile edges turned on, this could be quite hogging on your computer resources. So you will notice a little bit of stutter. I know the stream that you're seeing is a little bit laggy anyways, but trust me, you'll find your model running a lot smoother if you actually turn off the profile edges. That way your computer is not calculating the edges as you orbit or zoom in and out. And also one more thing that I wanted to mention is that if I were to go to one scene and then go to window and then model info, and then make sure your scene transition is turned off. So in this case, I have disabled it so that I can quickly change the scenes. If I actually have it turned on, and if I go to the next scene, sometimes you have this animation, and in my case, it's actually going through the floor, so it's not really ideal. And also on some of the interior scenes that you'll see yourself going through some furnitures and whatnot, and it makes your computer think that much more. So in my case, I prefer to turn that off so that we can quickly transition to different scenes, as well as not eating up your resources of your computer. So that's definitely what I recommend. And I'm sure Aaron will cover a bit more on preparing your SketchUp file for rendering purpose. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next bit. So let's have a look at this scene that I was talking about. So this is an export off of the SketchUp model. You can kind of see the shadow, but it is not much in terms of shadow and the light play in the scene. But with the help of Enscape, we can make the scene look something like this. And let's kind of note some of the quality of the light, what the light is doing. You can see the kind of soft wash of light that has been filtered by trees and then washing up on this wood screen here, as well as the downlight that is shedding some light right here. You can kind of see the cone of it, as well as the shadows are softer, the edges are softer on the floor, and you can clearly see the direction of the light that is coming in. It is casting a soft shadow, as well as some cove light here between the ceiling and the wood panel here, and then just a wash of light that is coming down. So you can kind of see the impact. You can actually also see a reflection of the light on the glazing as well, and some reflection on the material where it sort of bounces off, and then you can catch the reflection, which is nice, and it brings up the realism. So if we were to go back to SketchUp scene versus rendered scene, so quite a difference. And we can just really up the realism up a notch. So this is just a different scene of the same model, but you can kind of notice a similar thing. There's always that sort of soft shadow and light, and you can kind of see the direction of the shadow here. I don't know how clear this is on the shared screen, but there is a soft shadow here, which adds that much of a realism. And this is not a completely flat color. There is a gradient and play of shadow and light on both sides. So it adds that much of realism, along with the reflection that is on the glazing and also on the material. So this is all great. And that's what rendering is adding to your scene with help of Enscape. Now let's look at the real-time portion, the emphasis on real-time right now. So let's look at what real-time actually means. So I'm going to go back to the actual live view here. And for this purpose, I'm going to snap my SketchUp screen onto the left and then Enscape onto the right. Typically what I do is I own two different monitors, so I put the SketchUp screen on one side and then Enscape on the other. I can possibly show that on the presentation screen or the shared screen so that you guys or my client is only seeing the Enscape side versus I'm looking at SketchUp so that I can change stuff. And that's basically what real-time is. So as you can see, as I kind of orbit and zoom in and out, my Enscape screen is also changing. And it is because I have this button on, which is a synchronize views button. You can keep it on or keep it off depending on how you want to handle it. On my scene, what I'll do is I'll go back to that saved spot and then disable this so that you guys kind of see the impact of any changes on the fixed view versus I can go ahead and do whatever I want on SketchUp side in terms of view positioning. So you had definitely a control. So that's something you want to utilize, especially when you're doing live presentation like this. So the example I want to show is when I move this seating a little bit, pull that up, you can see it kind of updates. Maybe the change was too little. So let me pull that a little bit closer. And then also if I change any materials in the scene, so let's say this wood is a bit too dark, we want to lighten up the scene, then I can just change the tone of the wood, and now it becomes a little bit more birch, and it lightened up the scene. And another tip here is to just kind of introduce the human element into the scene, because when things are too lined up in the scene, actually I kind of have rotated this around as well, but when things are too well aligned and looking a bit too set up, it can kind of take you away from that realism, because in real life that may be not as possible. So adding a little bit of rotation and having them slightly misaligned is a little bit more helpful, I would say. And it's especially true when you have rows of chairs or tables, so that you have some things that are looking somewhat more realistic. But in this case, we can pull a little bit further just so that you can see the change happening. However, if we introduce too much of a human element, you can have the seating on top of the table. We obviously don't want that, so we can undo, and all of those undos and redos will be impacting Enscape scene as well. So let's flip over to the slides. So when you are ready with all the presentation renderings, and when you're ready to hit that render button, you can always just hit the screenshot button, basically the image render. So up here on the rendering screen, let me just kind of go to a different scene like this one here. Maybe let's look at some of these. And then synchronize a view, and then maximize the Enscape. So you got this wonderful scene. Now you want to hit render. Then there's a button right here. It's called screenshot. And notice how that says screenshot rather than like an image render, because it's as quick as just screenshot. It takes probably less than a second or so. So it is real time, and it is very, very quick. And I do want to note that there was a Shift F11. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. It may be a bit tiny, but it says Shift plus F11. So that is the hotkey or short key for taking a snapshot. So I typically go around within the model and kind of frame up the view, and then I hit Shift F11. And then they'll go ahead and just basically render that scene. So I can go snap, 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 and then save up a bunch of images, and then I can later select whichever that I want to share for that specific scene. And that shortcut is changeable. If you go to settings, and then under the input, the hotkeys, and then it lists the screenshot hotkey. But for me, Shift F11 has been the default, and it always worked fine for me. So I have sort of a muscle memory at this point. So that is a good tip, especially when you're trying to quickly render things, and it'll make your workflow a lot quicker.
Hey, Joseph. Just to let you know, that's about 15 minutes so far. So great tips so far. Thank you.
All right, I'll continue on. Thank you. And also one more thing I wanted to mention about image rendering is the fact that if you go to visual settings and then go to the output, I also dedicated the default folder as my desktop, and then I checked on automatic naming so that I don't have to come up with a unique naming of the files that I save all the time. When you're going snap, snap, snap and saving a lot of rendering files, thinking of a unique name for each scene is quite a task. I can't really think of, or I can't remember the last number that I had used. So having the automatic naming and then just seeing the desktop very quickly. So here it just saved those scenes and timestamped with the date and I can just quickly save that up and then keep going. So let's look at how all of this could apply specifically to the interior scene. As I have demonstrated on the last section, sometimes exterior and interior takes a different approach. Exterior, the major light source is just usually the sun, unless it's sort of like a nighttime. Whereas in the interior, you've got a lot of different type of artificial lighting. So you want to take a different set of approach. And that's what I will be focusing on today, sort of the light quality and light and its quality. And obviously there are different type of aspects that we need to consider when it comes to interior rendering, such as export methods, bump map, or reflection, displacement map, that sort of thing. But with the limited time we have for this webinar, I'll be focusing just solely on the artificial lighting. So let's move on to the next scene. You can kind of see what sort of SketchUp view would be on the left, and then how it would render on Enscape on the right. And let's take a note on the overall rendering quality differences. So this scene is now rendered as a medium setting, and that basically means less calculation on the rays that are, or lights that are being calculated in the scene. So it's basically taking a little bit of shortcut, but it is not as resource needed. So your computer is going to have a lot easier time rendering this or handling the model on sort of the real-time live. So for presentation like this, I want to keep things a little bit, I would say, as low as possible, just so that I don't have risk of either model crashing or it doesn't stutter as much. So here on the medium settings, you can kind of notice the horizon that is happening on the window reflection here. It's not as too bad, but that could be a deal breaker for some of you. And also you can kind of see the filtered light through the trees. That looks beautiful, but in real life, it wouldn't be as sharp as that through a translucent material like a curtain. So that is, I would say, not as realistic. And you'll notice the shadows on the floor are quite sharp, and kind of blurring that out, just like what you had seen before, would be a bit more calculation intensive. Therefore, it is kind of cutting a shortcut here. But if we look at the ultra setting, so sort of the max setting, you'll see that the blurred or softened light effect on the curtain, which is beautiful, as well as the edges of the shadow that's casted on the floor. It is sharper towards the actual edge of the geometry, and then it kind of fades out as it reaches further, which is a lot more realistic. And you can kind of see general lighting is a lot softer and a lot more appealing, and it's more desirable. But again, this is going to be hardware intensive once you have it set as ultra. And notice the reflection on the window doesn't have a hard horizon that's coming from other side of the scene. So sometimes it is unavoidable because you want to keep your resources, you want to make sure your computer runs smoothly. So sometimes I keep this as a medium settings, but here a little tip that I have is to increase the outlines on the visual settings so that you can kind of sharpen the edges. So that is, let me show you here. So if you go to the visual settings, you can go to here, and then I have the outlines turned on. So there's a slight difference between no outline versus about 20% is what I prefer. You can kind of go overboard if you want, but things start to kind of fall apart once you have it looks a bit too cartoonish. But somewhere around 20% is my personal favorite. It just adds that much of a clarity, or sharpens the image, or sharpens the edge, as well as giving you that ambient occlusion look, if you know what that means. So in this specific presentation, I found that rendering quality high is still adequate. It doesn't eat up as much resource, so I'm going to keep it as high, as well as 20% outlines. And that is typically my preferred sort of settings. So going back to the slides, let's have a look at this scene and notice a couple of things that we're going to study today, which is the global light that is coming from the sun. There's also ambient light if you want to be a bit more technical, but we're not going to worry about that. Just the global light, or the sunlight that is coming in from the large window here, is coming in this way. You can kind of see it. And then also the Cove Light that is up here on the ceiling. There was another one on this side, but you can't really see on this view. Also the Downlights, these are kind of lighting up on the surface and softly lighting up the floor as well. And then the lights that are on the fireplace. And we might have another type of light that we want to discuss depending on the time I spent. The first one is the global light, as we said. In this scene right now, only light source is the global light, or the sun that is coming in from this window. And notice how we can change the time of the day on the SketchUp side. So if we go here on the shadow dialog, or the tray, we can actually modify this, and then notice how that changes on Enscape side as well. So you can well do a shadow study without actually having the shadow turned on SketchUp side. So that's what I typically do. I have the scene saved without the shadow, but all of these time of the day and the time of the month date of the month will also update on your specific scene, meaning it gets saved with your scene. Therefore, you can always snap back and then expect the time of the day is saved as you have saved before. So that's what I typically do. But if you want to test something out very quickly on the Enscape side, you can also hold down your Shift key and the right mouse button to change time of the day. I can go to night if I want, but obviously we haven't got any artificial light yet, so I won't be able to see much. But you can have the set time differently. And then now if I go back to this specific scene back, and you'll see how it just changes back to the save time that is on the SketchUp side. So, and then the next one that I want to mention is the Cove Light. So that is on this corner right here. So this is where I will be talking about the self-illumination. My SketchUp wants to do a little hot save or mid-presentation. That's great. Sorry. Okay, so if I were to disable the synchronized view so that it just parks on that spot whilst I go in and change things, you'll notice that I have this material that has been saved up here. So if I were to sample that by holding down Alt and then sampling with the paint bucket tool, I have sampled this material, and the name of it has .immersive 2. So this is a material that I want to change. Another tip here is to put a little dot in front of the naming, and I do that because I want it to list on top of the rest of the materials that's in the model. So all the ones that I want to heavily modify, or I want to showcase on this presentation, I have put dot in front of it so that it shows up on the top of the list. And if I go to Enscape material dialog here, it also lists at the very top. So this is typically how I handle the ones that receive some modification in terms of reflection or self-illumination type of thing. So this emissive 2 is in question, and I can just check on this one, self-illumination, so that it lights up a little bit. It's not as strong because SketchUp is, the Enscape is compensating for the exposure, and there's quite a bit of light coming from outside, so we need to increase the luminance. And let's park somewhere here so that you can kind of see the effect. As the rest of the scene lights up a bit more, that's going to become a bit softer looking. So that is all I need to do in order to get sort of the Cove Light effect. You just need to apply the material and then change to self illumination. And then the next one I want to look at is the downlight. So we want to light these downlights up. So we can do that by looking at one of those downlights. I already have applied this material, immersive 1. So the same practice, we just need to go pick that and then assign self-illumination. And notice how that just turned into white. So it looks somewhat lit, but we're not going to try and light up the entire scene with the self-illumination. It introduces a lot of noise that way. So we want to assign a actual artificial light in the scene. So in order to do that, we go to Enscape Objects. And then here, just click on Spotlight. Actually, we need to go into the component. So double click into the component that we want to change. And then I can click on one of these edge, click once, twice, and then make sure you snap onto blue axis, click again, and once more, and then you have the light that is drawn. And that is now included on all other downlights. I want to kind of center it for my OCD sake. So if I do that, notice how it's lighting up. Actually, the intensity is not great enough to have any impact, so we're going to increase that again. Perhaps that's too much. That's not what I want. So somewhere on, let's just eyeball this. Okay, that looks fine to me. The scene is not as warm, and that's another thing that I wanted to mention is if you apply a color to your objects, the light objects, it applies that specific tone of a color. So if you were to go and modify this into completely weird color, you'll see that taking an impact. So if you want to change tone or color of the light, you can do that by assigning a color to the spotlight or any light that you apply in your scene. So that is looking good, and I'm fine with that. And let me go ahead and back out. And your scene is now good with the downlights. And then the next one I want to mention is the fireplace or fire. It's not necessarily a light, but it's going to function as a light in our scene. So if we go back here and then sample the fire, notice the dot fire, same practice. We just turn on the material editor, turn on self-illumination. It lights up, but it doesn't necessarily cast like a nice shadow or glow effect onto the rest of the fireplace. So what we can do is use the Enscape objects and put a line light. So here I can just put it down here, click twice, and then I can easily rotate this, and I'm going to try and put it somewhere between the fire. And then I can also increase the length of this. Let's just try and match what we got in terms of the fire length, and the same practice of applying the warm tone so that it looks like a fire tone of a light. Put it somewhere in the center like so, and then again we have to increase the intensity. So notice how that has this glow effect along with some shadows that are casting on the back. Okay, and then the next one I want to cover is the TV. How are we doing in terms of time, Gemma?
We are doing fine. I think you've probably got about another 5 minutes if you need it.
Okay. Yeah, let me go ahead and cover this a bit. So I don't know if you had noticed, but in the scene, I've got this TV, and so far it had been turned off. So let me go ahead and show you how to turn that on. So that one is turned off at the moment, but if we were to back out, and again, same practice of sampling that, and then Enscape Material Editor, and then turn that image on, or self-illumination on. And this is basically a Enscape website screenshot that I took, and then you can position the texture so that it fits right on that screen. And then once you do that, you can turn on the illumination. Right now it's too bright, so we need to bring down the luminance so that it looks fitting to the scene. So somewhere there. And notice how the number changes dramatically as it goes to the top of the bar here. This is a inverse square, and it's a property of physical light. So kudos to Enscape team actually making physically true slide for the luminance. Okay, so if I snap back and to the scene, you'll see how we have made all the lights work within the scene correctly. And you can see a gentle wash of light that's taking impact here, as well as the Cove Light that is wash. And then if we go to different time of day, like a night scene, that looks a lot suitable than what it was. And then we can just change to daytime for dramatic sunlight that's impacting into the scene, and I can just switch the scene if I wanted to like that. So basically that concluded this image preparation. We can also consider some other aspects such as a depth of field, or if you would, the blurring objects so that things are slightly out of focus. Those things are available if you were to go here on this specific scene. And I need to make sure I disable the synchronized views. And then here, depth of field, I can increase it so that I wouldn't do it as much as this, but notice how things are a bit blurred out except some of the area here. I can have the autofocus turned on, but I'll disable it and then just adjust this so you can kind of see that white area, which is going to be the line of focus. If I want to focus on that chair here, I can do that, but I do want to dial back down so that it's not as blurred out. So somewhere there, it's a little bit softer towards you, and things that are really far away are blurred out. And also, I would go into a bit of vignette for my final scene. If you are familiar with the photography, these are also photography thing along with the shallower depth of field, but you can increase the vignette so that you can notice the edges that are being darker so that it creates sort of the focus towards the center of your image. So those are the two techniques that you can employ to your image so that you drive the focus to the center of the image rather than the edges. And that could be sometimes more desirable versus not. Sometimes on your interior scene, you want to make sure everything is as sharp as they can through the edge to edge. So that depends on your application, but you have that at your disposal to use it if you choose to do so. So I think that concludes the final slide of what I have prepared. There are a lot more in-depth guides that are available on Enscape's website, along with their blog and the videos that they create. And I do have some tutorials as well on my channel, so be sure to check out their website as well as my channel. And hopefully this was enough to get you inspired and understand the capabilities of what Enscape and SketchUp is capable of doing, and doing a fantastic looking interior renders. And I can hand over to Aaron, if you would, Gemma.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Aaron, I've just made you the presenter, so over to you.
All right, can you guys see SketchUp right now?
We can, and we can hear you, so
Okay.
All good.
Excellent. Hey, we're there. Awesome. I was just taking notes, so I apologize. It took a second to get on there. Thank you, Jess. That was awesome. And if you guys, he's downplaying, but his YouTube channel is a great spot to learn information about rendering, VR, all kinds of good stuff. So definitely check that out.
Thank you. I wanted to... And I'll mute myself.
Oh. You are welcome. All right, so I want to go through some things talking about prepping a SketchUp model for rendering. Obviously, Joseph got into using Enscape and getting the most out of it. Enscape is awesome. Real-time rendering is great. It falls well in line with what SketchUp is. SketchUp, we talk a lot about, you know, quickly and easily getting on the screen what you need to see, and that kind of goes hand in hand with real-time rendering, where you can see how this is going to look and make changes. I just love watching the way Joseph uses Enscape and seeing those updates happen real time on the screen. It just feels very SketchUp-y. So I want to run through here. I'm going to go fairly quickly because there's some things I want to touch on, but I do want to make sure we have time for you guys to get some questions answered. So I just want to go through a handful of things that you want to keep in mind as you prep your model for rendering. One of the big ones is when you're creating your SketchUp model, create scenes for your renders. I know this sounds kind of simple, but it's amazing how often people don't get this set up right. If you have something you want to see in a render, get a scene created, save that scene, and it's going to make it so much easier to get an exact view when you go into rendering that way. One of the things you can do, Joseph touched on some awesome things there, turning shadows off, profiles off, disabling animations to make your SketchUp model snappier as you use it. Another thing goes for scenes. Obviously, this model has a lot of scenes set up for rendering, which is awesome. One of the things that can slow down SketchUp is generating the thumbnails for these scenes. When you create your scene, you can right-click on it and you can turn off Use Scene Thumbnails. Turning it off is going to stop it from having to regenerate those thumbnails. So that's going to speed up your model quite a bit. I think when I first opened this model, it did spend a couple of minutes generating those thumbnails. So that's going to be a big time saver if you're, you know, I don't have the snappiest, the best computer in the world here. So any way I can make my model more performant, I try to do that. One of the big things for rendering in general is going to be faces. You do want to make sure you have the correct face facing out. So SketchUp is a surface modeling tool. It does have a front face and a back face for any faces. But when you get to the point where your model is like this, it can be hard to see what's a front face, what's a back face. The way to check that is going to be to go up to View and then go to Face Style and flip over to Monochrome. This doesn't get rid of the geometry you have. It's just going to show you the insides and outsides. This makes it real quick and easy to identify. Oops, this should be backwards. I can double click in here and reverse face to get the right face pointing out. And then of course I can always go to View, Face Style, and go back to Shaded to get that to come back from, you know, this all white view. And there we go. Like I was saying, as illustrated, not the snappiest machine in the world, so it does take a second for a big model like this to re-render on my screen. All right, one of the big ones is level of detail. So I'm going to spin around here and we're going to go inside, same spot that Joseph was at. So if I'm going to just pop my head in here and we can look around and kind of see some stuff. One of the things that can be demanding on both the renderer and on the modeling software, so SketchUp and Enscape, is the amount of detail you have in a model. Ideally, you want to put enough detail in your model that it satisfies whatever you're going to use it for. So if the goal of this render is to get a nice living room render, then there's certain details you don't have to have. One of them specifically is, I'll come in over here to this ladder right here. It is a very cool looking ladder, but there's a lot of detail in here that frankly just going to get lost. So if I double click on the ladder, I'm going to go ahead and hide the rest of my model as I go through here. You can see if I click in here, I have like bolts in here. I have a very fancy pattern in here. Every time SketchUp redraws the screen, it draws all of these surfaces. So if I'm looking at this, and this is the view that I'm going to see that ladder from, and see all that detail is lost. I can't see the bolts. I can't see the cutouts on the face of the rungs. So all of that ends up being kind of superfluous. It's extra detail that I can't actually see, and it does slow down SketchUp, and it's extra surfaces for the renderer to consider. So again, not that this is a bad model, it's a great model. If I was coming up and I was rendering a scene like this, oh yeah, that's gonna look good. But again, if I'm back out like this, it's extra detail that's in the model that I don't actually need for my final render. So it's something to consider, maybe simplifying if I'm ever having any issues with, the model stuttering or taking a long time to jump scene to scene, something like that. Something to consider is simplifying those kind of models, or that geometry inside the model. All right. One more thing I want to touch on. I know like I said, I'm going quick, but I want to make sure you guys have time to get your questions answered. These things right here, these, I guess this doesn't look too far from like what a Tesla truck looks like, but you can see these are pretty blocky looking things. So what these are actually Enscape assets. So what this means is here inside of SketchUp, so I'm going to go ahead and click into one, and I'm going to turn on Show Hidden, and you can actually see there we go. Oh no, it's all softened. Triple click. So you can see that not a lot of detail here, super low poly. This is ideal for inside of SketchUp. So as I'm spinning around and working inside of SketchUp, this is real easy for the screen to redraw. This makes it super snappy, that sort of thing. But Enscape knows when it sees this thing to actually put in a highly detailed renderable car. So this is a big, I don't know if you guys have ever modeled something like a vehicle before, but that's a lot of polygons. That's a lot of detail. That's a lot of materials. You can see right here, there's really nothing to this. I can put it where I want it, and then I can check in Enscape that it looks good. And what I'll get is a detailed car with all the shiny bits, all the little pieces to catch the light, paint, all that stuff. But I don't have to sacrifice my SketchUp view to bring up a model that's millions of polygons. I can do it with just a couple hundred polygons here and still end up with a highly detailed render. All right, I'll call it there. Obviously, I could hop in here. We could dig through this model all day, but I want to have time for questions. So I will hand it back over to you, Gemma, and you can ask some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aaron. That was really cool. So we have had a few questions come in, and we will probably have some time to answer a few more. So get them in the chat thing when you can. So first up, there's a question on materials. So are the materials all from SketchUp, or are they part of Enscape's own collection? So don't know who wants to tackle that one. Joseph, do you want to give it a go?
Sure. Basically, Enscape utilize any of the materials that you have assigned to SketchUp model. So however you manage your materials inside of your SketchUp side, will be able to just take that as you have seen. The Enscape material library or material editor matches exactly what you have under the paint bucket tool of SketchUp.
Fantastic, thank you so much. On the topic of materials still, so Joseph, one for you. How much time did it take for you to map materials, lights, and create the render scenes?
This one specific, I actually give credit to Enscape team, because Enscape team has provided this model, and I did a little bit of cleanup to make sure things kind of run smoothly. Basically, the things that Aaron had been talking about, I've gone through the model and clean up things. But in terms of adding material and finding the geometry, it could be anywhere from a couple of hours to days of work. So it really depends on your project scale and amount of detail that you're willing to put down. I would, however, in terms of spending time of material, I would keep the material as sort of default how it gets created inside of SketchUp. So I'll leave most of them as they are and just add sort of unique materiality, let's say a reflection, or as I was talking about self-elimination, I would add just those values selectively so that if you go too much with it, then obviously it's gonna start to eat up and make your machine a lot laggier or stuttering. So you want to make sure you put that little dot in front of the material name so that things are somewhat organized and handled correctly.
Brilliant, thank you. Is the vegetation from SketchUp or is it from Enscape?
This specific model was actually one of those Enscape assets that Aaron was talking about. They are just colored kind of green kind of vegetation, but most of what you saw on the scene is all Enscape assets. So I don't know if you had noticed, but they kind of do a gentle brush of wind. So you see a little bit of animation, which is a clue that those are actually Enscape assets.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, a question here for you. How does Aaron do the neat trick by selecting the ladder and then hiding the rest of the model? Which I also thought was pretty cool.
Absolutely. I just have a shortcut key mapped to the command to hide rest of model. Under View, Component, Edit, you have an option to hide the rest of the model anytime you enter a component or group. So View, Component, Edit, and it's right there. You just assign a shortcut key to it like I do to quickly toggle that on and off.
Great,
I did that too. It's really nice, by the way.
It's very helpful, yeah.
Great. Okay, there's a question here about bump. Literally, what about the bump, please? So I'm guessing they'd like maybe some information on how that works in Enscape, or if it's possible.
Bump map?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah, you would apply the bump map on the Enscape side through the Enscape material editor, and you can use the albedo settings, which is really nice how Enscape has implemented that so that you don't have to create a completely different set of bump map, and it just takes the image and makes it a bit bumpier, and you can turn it into normal map or displacement map as you find those maps separately. But again, if it is not a major item in your project or your scene, then I would not apply because it will eventually eat up your resources. So I would go gentle on it, but that is definitely available and takes a big impact in your image in terms of realism.
Fantastic, thank you. And Joseph, a question here for you. What kind of GPU are you running for the model you showed today?
My GPU is RTX 2080 Super.
Nice, fantastic. Let's see else. What have we got here? Is there a way to turn off the light images in SketchUp that Enscape adds without losing the settings?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. Is there a way to turn off the light images in SketchUp that Enscape adds without losing the settings?
Enscape adds without losing the settings. I am not sure what that means. Okay. You can hide the artificial lights that you have created on SketchUp side, and basically it will hide inside of your Enscape as well, so that it just turns off for that moment, and then as you unhide all or unhide those elements back, then it will turn back on. I think that's what it meant.
Okay, fantastic. And if not, then feel free to pop that in the chat pane. Give us a little bit more information there. What affects more rendering time, the quality or the resolution?
actual render time, I guess overall quality will dictate more of a render time, but the resolution wise, what I'm more concerned of, because when you're doing a final render, I'll bump up the overall quality anyways, because Enscape is quick regardless of it is medium setting, high setting, or ultra. It's just that when I'm live modeling or doing real-time rendering, when I'm doing a webinar presentation like this, I don't want it stuttering. Therefore, I just bring down the quality. The resolution is set, however, and it just is dictated by your monitor's resolution in terms of live modeling. When you're final rendering, you can do however much you want. It's not going to add too much time to your actual render or snapshot image time.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's a nice comment here. Great presentation, much impressed with SketchUp and Enscape's capabilities. Many thanks. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We like those kind of comments.
It's so nice.
Some people are asking about the recording. Yes, we will be sending a copy of the recording to you as soon as it's available via email, so keep an eye out for that. Another question here. Can you export video animations from Enscape?
You could answer that too, Gemma.
I can. Yes, you can. It is possible to do that. And we have a few tutorials on our YouTube channel, so if you have a look at that, then you'll find out how exactly you can do that in Enscape. Let's see, we've got a couple more minutes. Let me see if I can grab a couple more. Let's find a couple of good ones. 360-degree panoramas. Is it possible to create those with SketchUp and Enscape?
Absolutely, and it is available in monoscopic and stereoscopic. So depending on what you need and whether you understand that or not, I'm not sure. But stereoscopic is great, understanding sort of how far the objects are away from you on your scene. So I have used that, and it gets hosted by Enscape, and it's great.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Let's have a look here. So I've got one more. There's one here about a question about transparency. So Joseph, you were showing the fire at one point, and they're asking here if you were to add some transparency to the fire, will it get rid of the shadow from the flames on the back of the fireplace?
I think it would. When it's self-illuminated, transparency does a funny thing, and I'm unable to confirm at the moment. Let's try it, actually. Can I actually share my screen, by the way?
Sure, yeah. Let me make you presenter. There you go. Just share your screen, and then we'll be able to see.
All right. Yeah. This was the car that Aaron was talking about. I flipped to the scene. So great point about having a much lesser geometry on the SketchUp side like that, yet it gets all rendered nicely on Enscape side. Anyways, let's fly back to the fireplace. Let's test it. So if we were to make that transparent, you can first make it transparent on SketchUp side, and it's not really taking an impact. So material editor, and then we cannot assign transparency when it's self-illuminated. So yeah, there's that of the answer to the question.
Nothing like testing it live. Love it. Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we've hit the top of the hour, so we'll have to wrap things up. But thank you both so much for an amazing presentation and showing us both Enscape and SketchUp. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, let's call it a day then. Thank you so much, Aaron and Joseph, for presenting to us and answering so many of the questions as well. Really appreciate that. So that's the end of the webinar. I hope you, the audience, enjoyed the last hour and learned a few new things as well. Before you leave, there will be a short survey that will pop up on your screen as you exit the webinar. So if you could provide us with your feedback on today's session. We would really, really appreciate it. So keep an eye out for that. And like I said, during the Q&A, we will also send out a copy of the recording via email as well as soon as it's available. So that will be with you shortly. So with that, thank you once again, Joseph and Aaron, and thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your days. We'll see you soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.